On the night Madeleine disappeared, 3 people were just a few meters away, and they were never questioned by the police. Discover who they are and why their silence may be even more frightening than the crime itself. A child goes missing. It's the early hours of the morning. The mother screams, neighbors rush over, lights come on, helicopters fly overhead. Days later, the media transforms that seaside village into a global stage. Every detail becomes headline news. Every silence turns into an accusation. Every move the parents make is dissected as if they were protagonists in a scripted drama. And yet, 3 people who were there, around that room, on that very night, were never interrogated by the police. It sounds unlikely, right? But sometimes the most dangerous part of an investigation isn't in what is revealed, it's in what is ignored. Sometimes the most important clues aren't in the answers, but in the questions that were never asked. What you're about to see isn't a new theory about Madeleine McCann. It's a different look at what was left out. 3 figures who were just a few meters from the most famous disappearance of the 21st century, and yet they do not appear in the official interrogations. They never gave a statement. Their versions were never questioned. Nietzsche said that truth is an illusion we choose to believe because we don't know how to deal with what escapes our control. And if we never found the right answers, because we spent too much time looking in the wrong direction, if these 3 people had been the focus of the investigation and not just shadows on the periphery, could the story have ended differently? Most of the public believes that in an investigation of this magnitude, everyone nearby was heard, that every staff member of the resort, every person who passed by on the street, every eyewitness was interrogated. But that didn't happen. On that night, between 8:30 and 10 p.m., dozens of people moved around the Ocean Club area. The McCann's group of friends dined just a few meters from the room. Employees cleaned, cleared dishes, changed shifts. A security guard patrolled the corridors, and a private driver was seen in the vicinity of the resort. Yet surprisingly, 3 of these figures were never formally questioned, neither by the Portuguese police nor by the British police. They were mentioned here and there, in secondary testimonies, in alternative theories, but they never sat in a room to answer questions. They never said what they saw, or what they failed to see. That's when the real shock comes. Here, silence is not just the absence of sound. It is a construction, a shield, a filter over who can be questioned and who must be forgotten. This video will revolve around this invisible triad: the resort employee, the driver, and the security guard. And the most uncomfortable part is realizing that, despite being so close to the epicenter, no one thought it important to hear what they had to say. The lingering question is, why were these people not interrogated? An investigation that stopped the world, that mobilized international police, involved politicians, celebrities, the media, embassies. How could someone slip by unnoticed? To understand this, we need to look beyond the facts and enter the realm of power. Michel Foucault once said, "Where there is power, there is resistance. And where there is resistance, there is usually someone trying to hide something." The investigation into the Madeleine case was marked by a conflict of narratives. On one side, the Portuguese police trying to follow their protocols. On the other, the pressure from the British media, UK authorities, and public outcry demanding quick answers and an acceptable version of the truth. In this scenario, what emerged was the so-called institutional shielding, a side effect where anything that didn't fit the dominant version was simply set aside or silenced. The media began to center the case on the parents or on possible kidnappers from outside. The police themselves started treating some lines of investigation as too politically sensitive to pursue. Thus, those 3 figures, who could have broken the script, were left on the sidelines. They did not fit into the story that was being told. And for that reason, they were never required to speak. This problem goes beyond the Madeleine case. It appears in other crimes, other investigations. Whenever the focus is manipulated, someone important escapes through the cracks. On the night of May 3rd, 2007, the clatter of cutlery in the restaurant mingled with the low sound of a TV in one of the apartments. The sky was clear. A warm breeze blew. 3 people moved silently through the resort. An employee gathered towels by the pool. A driver smoked inside his car, the radio on. A security guard walked, distracted, along the side of the building. None of them drew attention. None of them passed by, saw, felt, and perhaps if they had been heard that night, the whole world would know something today that still remains a mystery. Now it's time to shed light where there was once shadow. Who were these people? What do we know about them? And the most intriguing part, Why, even though they were so close to the scene, were they left aside? The answer might completely change the way you see this case. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time to hit that alert, because what comes next is the kind of question many preferred never to ask. May 3rd, 2007, started like any other night for the group known as the Tapas 7. They were close friends of the McCanns, dining together at the Tapas restaurant inside the Ocean Club complex in southern Portugal. Each couple would occasionally go to the apartment to check on the children, an informal routine, but seemingly accepted by everyone there. When Kate McCann returned to her unit around 10 p.m. and noticed Madeleine was missing, the phrase that echoed through the courtyard was direct, cutting, almost cinematic. "They took her!" But while that phrase made headlines worldwide, other voices fell silent. And it is in that silence that the questions, almost never asked, begin to emerge. Because on that same night, while reporters were already on their way, 3 people moved discreetly behind the scenes at the resort. A local employee in charge of the laundry with free access to the rooms, a driver who made deliveries and parked near the apartments, and a night watchman responsible for patrols at critical hours. And the most surprising part? None of these 3 people were formally interrogated by the police during the main phases of the investigation. None. While the media shone the spotlight on the parents and the dinner table neighbors, these 3 names were completely overlooked. And although the case turned into a global spectacle, almost like a TV series with a pre-written narrative, these invisible supporting characters remained forgotten. Was it just an oversight, or is there something bigger behind this absence? Because if you think about it, what happens when a story is built only with the characters it deems fit to show? What is more striking is not what was said, but what was never asked. Let's take a closer look at the scene that night. The Ocean Club resort was vast, with multiple entrances and exits, many without cameras. The back door of the McCann apartment was unlocked. The windows, according to initial reports, were slightly open. The time between the last check and Madeleine's disappearance was about 30 minutes. The space was small, but just enough for something serious to happen, and for no one to see it. Yet someone might have seen it, and that someone might have been in uniform. The resort employee was gathering towels in the corridors near the apartments during that same time frame. He knew the rooms, the routines, the habits. The driver was parked near the pool area, in a camera blind spot. The security guard was patrolling precisely between blocks 5A and 5D, passing just a few meters from where everything happened. So why did the Portuguese police, under heavy British pressure, focus only on the theory of an external abduction by strangers or on inconsistencies in the parents' testimonies? Could it be that, from the start, it was already known who shouldn't be bothered? This is where the investigation starts to look less like a search for answers and more like a pre-written script, a script where the most uncomfortable questions are cut off before they can even be asked. As Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life. And perhaps in this case, the collective unconscious of authorities, the media, and public opinion chose the easier path, to point only where everyone was already looking, and to ignore the dark corners of the story. But now that you've heard the names of the 3 forgotten ones, it's worth asking, what if the truth was always right beside us, but never called to speak? From the moment the spotlights were turned on and Madeleine was declared missing, what should have been a transparent search turned into a backstage power struggle. It didn't take long for the British and Portuguese police to start clashing. They had different approaches, different paces, and above all, different interests. The tension between the 2 sides began almost immediately. On one side, Portuguese investigators trying to maintain control of the situation on their own turf. On the other, British officers arriving with technical jargon, diplomatic pressure, and a very clear non-verbal message. Be careful what you say about this couple. Meanwhile, the names mentioned earlier, the employee, the driver, and the night watchman, weren't even included on the priority witness list. The excuse? A lack of concrete evidence to justify a formal summons. There was a script to follow, one that involved protecting a public image already crafted by the media. And here enters the concept of institutional erasure. It's not just about not asking a question, it's about deciding from the outset who deserves to be heard and who should be forgotten. And in this case, the forgetting was selective. Imagine what these 3 people could have said if they had been heard with the seriousness the case demanded within the first 48 hours, when memories were fresh and details still vivid. Instead, time passed, versions consolidated, and the puzzle was assembled, missing 3 pieces. And no matter how much they try to justify it, this silence says so much more than any formal testimony. Because when you choose to ignore those who were near the scene, what you're really saying is, we already know what we want to believe. But this choice wasn't made in a vacuum. It was shaped by a system that, even in the face of a child's disappearance, still operates based on influence, appearances, and convenience. Foucault said, knowledge is power. And in this case, those who decided what was known also chose what would be forgotten. The British media sold from the beginning the image of a devastated, successful, innocent couple. The pain was real, but so was the shielding. And that's where confirmation bias comes in. When you start with a hypothesis, for example, that there was an external abduction, the rest of the investigation works to reinforce that idea. Any data contradicting the narrative becomes noise. Anyone outside that scope becomes irrelevant. In this scenario, the three forgotten characters turned into almost ghosts. They were there. They had access. They moved among the corridors, doors, and silences of that night. But since their stories didn't fit into the official narrative, they were set aside. And why does this matter? Because this erasure changes everything. It not only distorts what we know about that night, but also reveals what the system is willing to hide. Not just to protect individuals, but to protect institutions. Think about it. When a middle-class British family goes missing on Portuguese soil, and within 24 hours there is direct diplomatic involvement, is the search for the truth still the main focus? Or did the case cease to be about a little girl and become about reputations, embassies, and headlines? This is where the most uncomfortable questions are born. And when you go back to the beginning and realize that these three people could have completely changed the direction of the investigation, you understand the real problem. It isn't just what was done, it's what was avoided. And that brings us directly to the next point in the story, where silence may have been not only a choice, but a means of survival. What if, on that night, one of these three people saw something, but never spoke up? Maybe they were in the right place at the right time. Perhaps they heard an unusual cry, saw a door closing too quickly, or caught a muffled conversation in a corridor. But for some reason, they kept it to themselves. Now stop and think. How different would it have been if that resort employee had been called in during the first days? If he had been put face to face with the investigators and asked, "Where exactly were you at 9:30 p.m.? Did you see anyone coming in or out of Block 5? Did any movement seem strange to you that night?" Imagine his reaction. Hands trembling on the table, a slight shift in his gaze, the silence before the answer. Not because he was involved, but because he knew that any word off the script could cause trouble. The same goes for the driver. He was there, in the vicinity, with access to the parking lot and service area. If someone moved in haste that night, he might have seen it, but no one asked. No one wanted to listen. And the security guard? He was the one responsible for patrolling. Yet his routine that night wasn't recorded, nor cross-checked with the time of the disappearance, as if he had nothing to add. The issue here is not to make accusations, but to reveal what could have been done and was ignored. Because if these three people had been heard with the seriousness the case demanded, perhaps the course of the investigation would have been different. Perhaps today's doubts would have been resolved long ago. And maybe, just maybe, their silence wasn't due to negligence, but for self-preservation. There is something called official secrecy. It isn't a lie. It's a silent truth set aside because, if revealed, it would bring everything down. And it's hard not to think about that when we look at what happened with the Madeleine case. These three people were at a strategic point in the story. If one of them confirmed that they heard a cry out of place, saw an open door, or someone hurrying away, the whole structure of it was a kidnapping would have to be re-examined. And let's face it, that would involve dealing with much more delicate questions, even about the parents, the friends, the resort itself. That's why it's easier to leave it alone. Pretend there was nothing there. Stick with the more comfortable story, the one that already has defined characters and an unnamed culprit, because stirring that hornet's nest would require courage. And the truth is, not all institutions are willing to pay that price, but time does not erase what was silenced. The story of the Golden State Killer, for example, shows this. The case lay dormant for decades, until someone decided to look elsewhere. They used genetic genealogy, opened forgotten files, and in the end, found the one no one else was looking for. The same goes for other investigations that only advanced when old witnesses finally spoke up. In this context, silence is not just omission, it is survival, it is fear, and sometimes it is a choice imposed by those with more power than you. So when we ask why these three people were never interrogated, it isn't just a technical question, it's a question that bothers us. Because maybe what's missing in this case isn't more technology, but courage. The courage to ask old questions again. The courage to accept that the truth may be inconvenient. And the courage to listen to those who, to this day, no one has had the guts to invite to the table. The most frightening part of this case isn't just what happened to Madeleine, it's what was never asked, what was left out. The silence surrounding three figures who were there, at the scene of the crime, and who, until today, remain nameless, voiceless, without questions. And for me, that's the hardest part to swallow. Because we grow up hearing that every investigation starts with the basics. Who saw? Who heard? Who was nearby? But here it seems that logic has been turned upside down. They focused on who was more media-friendly, more convenient, and they forgot about those who could have provided the missing pieces to this puzzle. Aristotle's phrase keeps echoing in my mind. Doubt is the beginning of wisdom. And I ask you, if we already know who these people were, why is there still so much silence? Maybe because some truths are not easy to digest, or because dealing with them requires courage, as we've already mentioned. But the fact is that if these three remain in the dark, how many other cases follow the same logic? How many names were never heard? How many stories were never told? Simply because someone decided it wasn't worth asking? And if you also feel this restlessness, this desire to go beyond the most comfortable version, I invite you to continue this investigation with me. In the first comment of this video, there is complimentary content that delves exactly into this, how an official narrative is constructed, and what happens when we start questioning the pieces that were left out. I highly recommend you click there and see for yourself. It might be the start of a new way of looking at this case. If you like the approach of the video and want to follow the next episodes that also confront ready-made versions, subscribe to the channel. Here the focus is on telling what no one has the courage to say, with clarity, without beating around the bush, and with the respect that every story deserves. And tell me something in the comments. If you've stuck with me this far, comment, "I am a truth hunter." That way I'll know who is truly in this search. No offense to those who believe in the official versions, but there are people who prefer to dig deeper. And if you're that kind of person, I'll see you in the next video. Because the next story, perhaps even darker than this one, is already being prepared.